one, and we are live. We're good to go. Well, hi, Dorina. How are you?
Hi, Nick. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for
I'm
coming
doing good.
on. I'm looking forward to talking with you. There's so much I want to ask you. Jen Bell from the Well kind of steered me your way, and we were able to connect and finally jump on here and talk a little bit. So again, thank you for coming on.
For sure. I'm so excited that you're doing this.
Yeah, it's been something I finally just said I was looking at someone to partner with, and finally it was just like, let's just go, let's do it. I'm excited about getting to know the people in the community and leaders and interesting people. Yourself, you are an author, you're a mother, a wife, many things. I know you have a book coming out, so let's talk about that first. It's Walk, Run, and Soar, correct?
Yes, I do. Actually, I have a copy of it. So for those who are watching the video, I thought I'd show off the cover because I love it.
I love it too. It looks great.
Yeah, the designer did a great job on it. This is actually a 52-week running devotional. So it's a devotional that I wrote that's really geared towards walkers and runners. And I share a lot of running stories, ways that God has met me on my runs and races and trails, and just a way to kind of dig deeper that running is not just about the physical aspect, but it also can be a way that we can connect with God.
Nice. I love it. So you mentioned you have these races. Are these like competitive or just kind of for fun races?
Well, at this point in my life, I'm a mama in my 40s with 3 kids, and I don't really run competitively. I used to be an athlete when I was younger, but now I run mostly for therapy, and I run to keep in shape, to keep healthy, and especially living here in Central California, there's so much beauty. And so I call myself a glory chaser. I love to chase after God's glory, just seeing creation outside and running outside.
Okay, so that was one of my questions was I saw you you have another book called what's the other book called? I think I have it, Glory Chasers, correct?
Yeah, I have a Bible study called Glory
Okay.
Chasers, and that was published a few years ago. And that actually is where the idea of being a glory chaser originated. That was in 2014 that I chose the word glory as kind of my theme word for the year. You know, people do that to just
Yeah.
kind of focus in on one word. And so I focused that year. I ran a lot that year too, but I focused on the word glory, and I had no idea that that would end up being one of the hardest years of my life. But God used that word glory really to keep my eyes open to what he was doing, even in the midst of a lot of suffering and tragedy for our family. So that's where that idea came from. And the following January, I actually started writing this Bible study. So the Bible study is kind of a journey that scripture, there's so many ways that scripture talks about God's glory. So whether it's through worship or God's presence, through community, this Bible study helps kind of walk you through that. I use my own personal narrative to tell the story, but then I invite people to dig into scripture for themselves and see what they can discover about God's glory.
So see, I when I heard Glory Chasers, I immediately remembered, I don't know if you've ever heard of Tommy Tenney.
No, I haven't.
He's an author. I guess he would be considered like a revivalist or evangelist, something, but he had a book called The God Chaser. And
Okay,
so,
yes. Actually, I have heard that book because it comes up when you put my book name
yeah,
into Amazon, but I
okay,
have not read it. Yeah.
gotcha. Yeah, he kind of turned it into, I mean, it's a brand. I mean, there's, all kinds of books attached to it and studies and all of that. But the word glory, you said, was that back in 2016?
2014. Yeah.
2014. What was your kind of concept of glory before that, and what changed after that year? What does that word mean to you now, I guess?
That's such a good question. You know, I think glory can sometimes be a little bit confusing and even like such a huge concept that was one of the reasons why I wanted to follow that word in 2014. Because, you know, there's that aspect of glory. We think about glory in a, you know, secular sense where glory is about personal pride, and you think about the glory of maybe athletes who, you know, are amazing basketball players who can slam dunk, or you think about people who are, you know, the movie Glory that is about war, and there's all these different kind of concepts, but it's more pointing towards ourselves. And then if you look into scripture, and even a lot of the old hymns, they talk about glory in these different ways. And so I think in that year, I really learned how to kind of expand my own understanding of glory as anything that is God, anything that is all God. And so, like I said before, that includes worship, that includes presence, it includes justice, it includes God's heart for community, it includes, you know, just that our God is so creative, and so he made creation as a way to point us back to him. So that was kind of the journey that I went on. And to unpack the story a little bit more, that year, my husband, Eric Lee, we're operating a nonprofit organization in Haiti. And for Friends at the Well and many churches here in Fresno, they have supported our ministry. It was called Christian Friendship Ministries, and now it's called Haiti Go. And so we were the directors of this nonprofit. We were doing ministry. I was running a fair trade jewelry business called the Haitian Bead Project. We just were in what we felt like was kind of this sweet spot of ministry as a couple and as a family. And that year in May, we received a devastating diagnosis that my husband actually had stage 4 melanoma cancer. And he was an athlete and a coach, like a really healthy guy. I mean, almost to the point of obsessed with nutritional foods, and really an ambassador for exercise. And so that diagnosis came to us like this sucker punch to the gut. I mean, it was totally surprising. We had to cancel all our trips and our teams that were coming to Haiti that summer. And in the midst of it, I felt like God was just saying to me in a very quiet way, like, even this is going to be for my glory. And so, of course, it was a really hard time for me as I watched my husband's body deteriorate and this cancer really take over his body. But there was a strange kind of assurance and confidence in me that God was continuing to build, because he was present with me during those hard times. And so I got to experience his glory, even in the midst of that suffering. And even to just develop kind of a theology of suffering, that the Bible doesn't tell us that we're not going to suffer. It doesn't tell us we're not going to have challenges as believers, but in fact, quite the opposite. You know, that's the example that Jesus was, that he walked through suffering. And so God's word promises me that God's going to be present with me even through suffering and through grief. And I learned that in a powerful way that year, especially.
Yeah, I bet. I can totally relate. I had a best friend, you know, that died. I think he was like 35 years old. You know, he kind of battled that for a couple of years, but kind of, you know, went quickly but slowly. You know, visited him every day the last couple of months, and just went through that process as well with him. It's kind of a, you know, not very many people can understand that situation and coming out of that. I actually ended up, this kind of ties into your story, I believe, similarly, but I actually ended up being married to his wife after that. And the next, we didn't stay married, but we had a 3-year kind of marriage out of that, and everybody kind of really thought it was weird and kind of, I don't know, it was a crazy time, but we both kind of, somebody said it was like a bridge marriage, where we went from one spot of mourning and going through that, somebody that we loved and shared, And, 3 years went by and we kind of went our separate ways, but definitely that whole thing is unique. And, share a little bit about kind of, what God did after that and in your life.
Well, first of all, Nick, I just want to say I'm so sorry for that loss in your life. And I'm grateful for the ways that our stories are connected, but it's a really hard connection too, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, God did some crazy, wild things in my life after that. Eric Lee graduated to heaven, as I like to say it, in September of 2014. And I made some hard choices after his death. I decided to step back from our ministry in Haiti. I felt like as a mom and just even in tending to my own soul and needs that I needed to take a break from our ministry in Haiti. And so I just made Fresno our home base again, just trying to lean into some of that grief journey with my daughters, and knowing that I had an amazing community of friends and family here in Fresno that quickly just surrounded us and prayed over us. They were present. The ministry of presence was there with us during that time. And, I really didn't know what God had for our future. I've been a writer since I was a young person, and I used to be a journalist. I was a teacher at the time, so I continued teaching at Fresno State. But I just kind of laid it down before the Lord and said, okay, my future belongs to you. This is not at all the trajectory that I thought I was on. I thought we would be in Haiti doing ministry forever. And as often happens in our lives, there was a sharp turn on the path that I had to start running in a different direction. So basically, I came home, so to speak. I made home here in Fresno. And just to kind of fast forward to the part of the story that I know that you're asking about, God brought a good friend back into my life. His name is Sean. And Sean was one of Eric Lee's best friends. They were both runners, and so they grew up together. They went to church together. And Sean actually had gone on the very first mission trip to Haiti that I went on with Eric Lee. So the three of us met on that trip. There was like a whole group of us, 8 or 9 of us from our church that met on that trip. We became really close friends. We're still friends today. And so Sean, through the years, as Eric Lee and I got married, he was in our wedding. He supported our ministry just prayerfully and financially. He had moved back to Maryland, and he was working there for 9 years. But whenever he'd visit Fresno, he'd always come to our house. We would have him stay with us, or we would make dinner for him or whatever. So anyway, God brought him back to California. And I know that this is not an accident at all, but really he was not making that decision because of me. His mom was widowed, and she was having some health problems. And so Sean really felt called back to the Central Valley to kind of care for her, be connected with her. And God was working in his heart this special compassion for widows. Of course, not knowing that one of his best friends was going to pass away that summer. And God provided a new job for him down in LA for a short amount of time. Well, during that time, we connected again, just as friends. I reached out to him to thank him because he had come to the funeral, and he had dedicated a special Ironman race that he was doing. He dedicated it to Eric Lee. So I was so proud of him as a friend, and I reached out to him. So long story short, we ended up talking on the phone, and he came to visit. And you know what? God just started to open up my heart, and I was absolutely not looking to date. I was not looking towards that at all. But through some mentors and some friends, I felt like God was telling me to open up my heart. And I was like, God is scary at the same time, because I, genuinely did not want to put my kids through any more suffering. I was nervous about the timing, but every step of the way, I had people praying over me. And it was just really clear to me that God was kind of leading us in this direction, even though I was nervous about it. So long story short is that Sean and I did get engaged, and we got married in 2016. And, when we shared this with our friends and our families, our trusted mentors, it was unanimous. Like everyone was like, well, we already knew that was going to happen. We already saw that coming.
Yeah.
So I'm so grateful for the Lord's leading and for some trusted mentors and friends who came alongside us. And we've now been married for 4 years. So my girls have a new daddy. They're so connected and bonded with Sean. And this is not God's plan B. I don't believe that. I think it was part of the original plan. So that's kind of a bit of our story and how we are continuing to live and minister here in Fresno today.
And you guys really do have a beautiful family. And it was 3 girls that you have, right?
Mm-hmm.
How old are they?
Oh goodness, these girls are growing way too fast. My youngest is 8 and she's going into 3rd grade. And then I have an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old. So my oldest is going into high school. Her daddy went to heaven when she was 8 years old. So it's pretty just amazing to see these girls and how God has grown their hearts as well through this process.
Yeah. And is it, I have 5 kids, but they're all, they're homeschooled.
Okay.
So, nothing's really changed for them. How are your kids doing with the changes, and is everybody starting school? How is that looking today in 2020?
So crazy, right? Well,
Yeah.
my kids actually attend Fresno Christian schools here locally. And so our school kind of pushed back their date. So they're starting on September 8th. And it looks like we are going to be starting online.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm just kind of preparing my heart to be flexible this fall. And we'll see how mommy's going to do my work. And my husband, Sean's converted our closet into his office. And we're all going to be home together.
Awesome. Well, so I want to dive a little bit into your past. I think I was trying to look at your books, and I saw one of them, I believe, that said something about a Hmong child. I don't know if it was a cookbook and so I told Miss Kay, my girlfriend, that I think maybe she's Hmong, and then I saw something and it was Filipino. Where do you and your family come from? What is your beginning? How did were you born here in America? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, my family is mixed race, so we are definitely just a blend of cultures. My dad's side of the family is predominantly Filipino, but he's also part Chinese, Polynesian, and a little bit of African as well. And then my mom's side is mostly Italian. So I usually say I'm Filipino Italian because that's a little bit easier, but she also has some Armenian and Jewish heritage in there as well. And my husband, Sean, is Chinese American. And my late husband, Eric Lee, was Scottish and Armenian. So we have this great mezcla, right? This big mix of cultures in our family. I actually do not have any Hmong background, but I am a children's book author as well. And so I did write a book about the Hmong heritage, and it's a fictional story called A Stone in the Soup. So I did a lot of interviews with Hmong friends who shared their stories of immigrating to the Central Valley.
Okay, yeah, because it threw me off at first. My girlfriend is from Laos. She's Laotian, and our family gatherings were the same thing. My kids are half, I'm half Mexican and American. We have African American mixed in. We have, everything as well. So I love that. So the book kind of threw me off, but you have this love for cooking and stuff as well, right? Now, where did that begin? Did you do a lot of cooking with your family when you were young?
Yeah, definitely. So I grew up in the kitchen with my mom and my grandmas and my aunties, and my mom's side being Italian, like just so many traditions of making food together, especially at holiday time. Like many of our cultural traditions center around like making a special pastry called pizza piatta or homemade raviolis, the sauce, the meatballs, all the stuff on that side. And then my dad's side, my grandma's side, being Filipino, we did a lot of food and stuff together, cooking together in the kitchen. So my second children's book that is about culture. Actually, this is my third one, but it's my most recent one. It's called Cora Cooks Pancit. And
Yes.
it's about a little girl who is learning how to make a traditional dish called pancit with her mom. And she learns a little bit about her family history. And then at the end of the book, it has the recipe. So I'm definitely a foodie, and I love to try different ethnic foods. I love to try out local restaurants. And I'm hoping in the future that I'll get to write more books related to food as well.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, I love trying new foods. I'm one of the pickiest eaters ever. I didn't even have meat until I was like a senior in high school. Um, yeah, I just was raised on like beans and rice,
Mhm.
plain, no lettuce, no salads, nothing like that. So over the years, I always wanted to try things. I just didn't like a lot of stuff until recently. I've got somebody in my life that makes food taste good, so that might make the difference there.
Hey, that's a key, right?
Yeah, it's like I've tried this before, but it tastes good when you make it. But tell me a little bit about your kind of where did you have a very strong presence when it comes with Christianity, and I see everything kind of the scripture weaving in and out of things that you do. Were you raised in the church? Were you in a Christian home, or when did that happen?
Well, yeah, I feel super grateful that I was raised in a Christian home. I grew up actually on the south side of Chicago,
Okay.
and my parents, we attended a local church called the Church of God that was in Chicago, community, kind of a small community church up until I went to high school. And then for high school, I attended an Assemblies of God church that was also there in Chicago. And ironically, then I went to college at Calvin University, which that church background is the Christian Reformed Church.
Yeah.
So those are like
Yeah.
three very different strands of Christianity. But what I love about it is that my parents really raised me with that appreciation of diversity, not just culturally, but also in the way that people worship. Of course, Bible based was always really key and important to us. But even when we traveled, we always tried to go to different churches and just to connect with people and see how they worshiped God in different ways.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I love that. I've with ministry, I've always seemed to kind of gravitate towards citywide ministries, things that touch on different churches and stuff. And I've always I've always loved the different I guess you would call them like flavors of the church. And I just imagine God as this huge mountain, and everybody's on a different part of it. Not that they're higher or lower, but just different parts, and they all have these different experiences and different traditions. I remember even my stepmom would take me to a Catholic church on like the Christmas Eve for that service.
Yeah.
And, it was just completely different. And I always wondered, well, why do they do that? Why do they do this? And I'd love to find out the stories and stuff like that. But you're right. Those three churches are completely kind of different areas. So that's really neat. How did you kind of end up, let me say this a different way. How did you go from kind of just being raised in the church to it being like a personal thing for you? Do you remember there being a moment, or was it just kind of gradually?
I definitely had a conversion moment that I say, when I was a kid, I was actually 7 years old. I was in second grade at that community church back in Chicago. And it was a scene that's still pretty vivid for me because we on the Thursday before Easter, our church would do this Maundy Thursday service, and we would actually do a foot washing service where we
Yeah.
would wash each other's feet. And I just remember being a young person. I mean, I'm a storyteller now and a speaker, but I was always just enthralled with the stories that I read in the Bible. And that night, it just became really real to me. And when our pastor made that invitation after the foot washing for anyone to come forward that really wanted to make that commitment to Christ, I just found myself walking down that aisle, and my mom was with me. And so I prayed that prayer as a young person. But through the years, and now I'm in my 40s, we mature and we are challenged in different ways. And so if you had asked me as a young person if I would grow up and be, speaking and teaching and preaching in different churches and being able to share the testimony that God gave me of navigating grief, I would laugh. I mean, I was shy as a kid. I never would have imagined that that's what God would have called me into. But, he equips us for the things that he wants us to do in ministry if we're willing to step forward. So that's kind of the beginning of that journey for me. And then going to those different churches, and then even moving to Fresno back in 99, I have my own sort of journey here locally of going to, a couple different churches. Now my family attends the Well Community Church. So
what brought you here to Fresno? About what age were you at that point?
So I was just out of college, and let's see, I must have been 22 at the time. I came to Fresno because I got a job working as a newspaper reporter with the Fresno Bee. So I know newspapers are kind of going away. Not all the kids know what the newspaper is anymore because we read our news online. But out of college, I was a journalist. I didn't know anything really about the Valley, except for that it was like, 3 hours to San Francisco and a couple hours to the beach. And my brother lived down in LA. So it felt like an adventure that was worth jumping into. I thought I'd live here for a couple of years, and, it's 2020 now and I'm still here.
Yeah. So you said you had always had this love for stories and stuff. Was that your kind of idea throughout high school and college? Did you went to school for journalism or? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so I did pursue, actually I had got an English degree from Calvin University, which is a Christian school, but my minor was journalism, and I was the editor of the newspaper in college. So I was always kind of pursuing that as a professional career. But then God led me to some different types of writing and our ministry in Haiti as well.
So when you got to Fresno, was there any kind of community or friends that you knew here, or were you kind of just starting fresh?
Well, I really did not have any connections locally. I was really excited about the job. They had offered me a job as a features reporter, which out of college was kind of a big deal, because a lot of times when you start out in journalism, you have to start out kind of in a lower spot, not always what you really wanted to do. But I had the opportunity to work for the life section. When I first came to Fresno, I actually was engaged. And so my fiance was planning to move here with me. But just through, some things that happened in our relationship, we ended up breaking off our engagement. And again, I don't think it's an accident at all that God brought me to Fresno, but I probably wouldn't have had that courage and confidence to come here if I was completely by myself. So even kind of knowing that he was going to be with me, I stepped into that adventure, and, looking back now, I realize God did that on purpose, because that's where I met my husband, Eric Lee, and now even more recently that Sean and I got married.
Yeah, that happened to me too. My sophomore year, I was at a Seventh-day Adventist school, Christian school, and I got a scholarship to play basketball at the kind of the bigger academy in Monterey. It was like the 4-year, the big place to go. And I had really no desire to go. I wasn't a Christian at the time. I was kind of like anti-Christian. And the girlfriend that I had at the time was planning on going away to school at this boarding school. So I was like, well, I can go for free. I might as well go. So I went up there the summer before, and it was a boarding school, so you're living there on campus. And probably about a month went by, and she called and said she wasn't going to be able to go because someone had broken into her house and stolen the money that they were going to use. I don't even know if it's a true story. I don't know. But I kind of got tricked into going, and I was kind of stuck there, and it completely transformed my life. So that happens more than we think, but it's definitely God uses those times to go, I got to where I want you now.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Um, so say again, what was the position that you got as a reporter? You said feature.
Yeah, I worked for the feature section. So at that time, it was called the life section. So
Okay.
I got to write stories about authors, musicians, artists of different kinds. Really, the lifestyle section during that time was kind of those personal interest stories. So I got to interview a lot of people here in the community. And I also got to do some different activities. Like one of my favorite stories that I wrote was I took a kayaking class out at Millerton Lake and the Kings River. So my editor just had me like write about that experience of learning how to kayak for the first time. I did another story that was about salsa dancing. So I took a salsa dancing class and interviewed all the people and the teacher in the class and just got to really experience a lot of really fun cultural things here in the Valley. And that was one of the reasons why I was attracted to Fresno, because I knew it was really diverse culturally. It was a great cross section of people from around the world. And because of the interesting mix of kind of agriculture and urban, it made a great place for telling stories and for interviewing people too.
Yeah, it really is a great place. It's kind of that central hub. You may not want to be here in your 20s or teenage years, but I mean, it's a great place to raise a family. It's central. You've got the mountains you talked about. I mean, the glory of God, big time there. It's close to the beach, to LA and all that stuff. Yeah, I was born and raised in Porterville, which is a little town down the way. Um, and I always heard just negative things about Fresno, but I don't know. I love it. I love it. But to be fair, I might love it almost anywhere, but I love this place.
I'm with you. Yeah.
So coming to Fresno, was it a big deal for you to find a church? Were you kind of serious about church at that time, or was it just kind of, were you just a Christian in name? What did that look like?
I really started looking for a church right away. As I mentioned, I had a broken relationship, so I was in a really hard place in my life. And, coming from just a family and a heritage of faith, I knew that I needed to be in church. But it was hard as a, 20 something to be in a city that was completely new. I visited probably, goodness, like 8 or 10 churches.
Oh,
Um, and I was really looking for a church that had some young people that were my age, but I kept kind of striking out because it was either like a college group or it was like older singles, maybe who had been divorced or had different life situations. And that's not where I was at all. And then somebody actually told me about the Bridge Church, which at that time was Evangelical Free Church of Fresno. And they had a really large group called Cutting Edge, which was all kind of young career people. So mostly people in their 20s, post-college, just starting out their careers, like exactly where I was. And it's kind of funny, but I called the guy who was kind of the intern at the time, and I kind of grilled him. Like, I interviewed him. I was like, I don't want to go to another church. Like, I'm so tired if it's not really like the right fit for me. So I asked him all my questions of things that I was interested in, and he was so generous with me, and just really welcomed me. And I got connected with a Bible study group, and then eventually started to go to the church because of being involved in that group.
there is a weird, I think the first time I was divorced, I was like 32. So it was kind of in that spot, a little bit older probably, but it was difficult. But I definitely, that's kind of some of my passion, is to get to know some of the leaders and to get videos and kind of record them. That way people looking for church can get a feel of different ministries, different churches. And because my brother moved into town, I actually have stepped away from active ministry. So I was kind of looking for a fellowship, and we just didn't want to go through that, show up to church and check it out. I mean, it it can get tiring. I wanted to know the leaders. I wanted to, and people are busy. People are busy. They can't always make time to sit down with everybody. So that's kind of what sparked this podcast as well. So that's cool. From that point, where did you, what kind of, what was like, what was the thing that you kind of grabbed onto? What was it, like the Bible? I know you mentioned worship before. Were there any kind of influences in your life that you really grabbed a hold of?
That's a good question. Wow. Well, I think definitely Bible study. I've always loved Bible study. And like I mentioned, I got involved in that young singles group. That's actually how I met Eric Lee. We were both leaders for the Bible study, and it was, I don't even know, maybe 75 or 100 people. So we would come together for worship at a couple's house, and then we would split up into smaller groups to discuss each week. So at first I just attended, and then I eventually became part of the leadership. But I've just always had a passion for teaching the Bible and just creative ways to help engage people and really seeing that the Bible is living and active. It's not just this historical book, although it's very historically accurate. It's a book that applies to our lives today. And so, I had no idea that God would eventually lead me into Bible teaching and some of the stuff I'm doing now. But I think because I was so attracted to those stories, and I was a storyteller myself as a young person, that was one of the threads that he was kind of weaving into my heart during that time. And leadership has always been, a part of my heart too, since I was a young person. So I ended up getting very involved with that leadership team. And then eventually when Eric Lee and I got married, I started helping out with the women's Bible study at the Bridge Church, teaching and helping lead groups through that. So at this point in my life, I would say, my passion is really teaching the Bible to women and engaging women in community through that. And then God gave me 3 daughters. So, I'm in women's ministry at home too.
Yes, big time. What is, like, now that I know you do you do it every morning, or I know I caught your Tuesday morning kind of teaching. Is that a everyday thing or once in a while?
Yeah, you know what? That was an accidental COVID thing.
Oh, really?
I've been a speaker, and so I speak a lot for women's groups, women like churches, retreats, that kind of thing. And then I do a lot of speaking in the schools with my children's books. And then when COVID hit, a lot of people were canceling things. I didn't have as much speaking, and I just kind of said, okay, Lord, what do you want me to do? I want to always be using my gifts. And he said, well, I just want you to pray. And so I was like, okay, well, I could do that. I'm going to try to be creative and use this technology. So I started this 7:30 a.m. prayer thing, and I was doing it every day of the week, not the weekends, but weekdays. And I just invited people to come. I would read a little scripture, do some teaching, and then pray. And we did that every day for the whole time that Fresno was sheltering at home. So it ended up to be, several months. I never anticipated that. And I love how God just works in crazy ways. I mean, he just brought people that I never would have expected from all different age groups and different churches who would join me in the mornings. And it was a chance for me also to encourage people as I was being encouraged, because I'm praying, it's not like a performance in any way. And so after we finished kind of the sheltering time, when Fresno opened up a little bit, I just moved it to once a week, so I could work on some of my other projects and be with my family. But it's a once a week thing that I've been doing, and I really enjoy being able to use Facebook and Instagram as a way to, just reach out and teach God's word and pray together.
Yes. And now, do you have a certain process when let's say you're gonna do next Tuesday? When do you start thinking about what you're gonna talk about? Does it take you like a whole week to prepare it, or you wake up that morning and you're ready to go, just spur of the moment?
That's a fun question. I wish I had more of a process. I mean, definitely if I was going to teach at a church or for a retreat or something, I would spend weeks kind of just praying over it, marinating, putting down my outline and doing study. But for this, just because it is a little more casual thing, I feel like I mostly just pray and ask God, okay, you know, what do you want me to talk about this week? And inevitably he'll lead me to some passage. So I haven't really followed a certain structure or a certain book that I read through, but just, you know, in that moment, you know, especially in the beginning, I felt like, you know, so many people are dealing with fear and anxiety. And so I found myself digging in the scriptures, like, what does it say about fear and anxiety? How can I empower people through that? And, you know, right now is a time when all these families are gearing up to do school, most of them online. So this past week, I talked about perseverance and just that virtue of perseverance that is throughout the Bible. So I kind of go on some different themes that God will just bring to my heart each week.
Gotcha. How, what are you doing specifically? I know you have kind of a ministry to other widows. Is that something that's like a structure? Do you have a group that you speak to all the time? What does that look like?
Well, we started this group a few years ago. It's called the Widow Mama Collective, and it's a Facebook kind of support group, I would call it. And really the idea grew out of just my own experience that, you know, I was widowed. I was 37 at the time when my husband died. And there's an incredible group of women here in Fresno led by my friend Patty Behrens. And she gathers young widows. Basically, most of us were moms. And so she would gather them for a monthly meeting. And I already had a couple of friends who were part of that group. So it was like, I never expected that to be my story. It's not like a club that you want to join in any way, but it was definitely like just awesome that I could go to these meetings each month, and there, you know, there's 10, 15 of us, and we could share our hearts. And Patty has a background in counseling and therapy. And so she would facilitate and kind of lead us through just discussing and resonating, relating to each other. And then as God continued to open up doors for me to speak, both locally and just in different places around the country, I realized that it was a really special thing, because there's a lot of young widows who would come and talk to me afterwards and say, I have no support. I don't know anyone. I have like no friends that are young widows. And so I just had this burden on my heart for almost a year, but I was a little bit afraid to step into it because I knew there was also this heaviness of leading a group, and I don't have, you know, a schooling or a therapy background. But what happened is I ended up recruiting 3 other friends who are also widows, who are authors and speakers, and they live in different parts of the country. So we started this group, and we invited any, you know, widow mamas who wanted to join us. So on Facebook, then we have different days that we connect with the women. I happen to do Tuesdays and Fridays. So I share my prayer post with them, and I share articles, music, words of encouragement. I led them through my Bible study this past summer. So it's just a way that we can encourage, that people can ask questions, and we can be transparent with each other and just support each other. And it's really amazing because there's women who are in other countries, a lot of people across the US who are part of that group. And, you know, of course, Facebook can't replace in-person connection, but it is a deep connection. So I'm grateful that God opened that door.
That's awesome. I remember when we were going through that, my ex-wife, I mean, it was, and we were a part of a decent sized church at the time, but it just felt like you were all alone. You know, everybody's there for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, and then you're just kind of there. So I think that's awesome that you guys are doing that. And how do people find that? Are they able to just connect with you? And
just on Facebook, you can just search Widow Mama Collective.
Okay.
So when we started, the four of us who are kind of the founders of facilitators, we invited our audiences because we were already ministering to women in different spaces about grief. And then it's sort of a word of mouth thing. We've done some Facebook advertising specifically for widows. So people kind of come through all different avenues.
And kind of with getting to wrap this up, you're local here in Fresno, California area, right?
Yeah.
What once the craziness, once the madness kind of up dissipates and we're able to see each other in person, how can people connect with you in person? Like you said, the technology is awesome. Are you a part of? You said you were going to the Well Fellowship now.
Mm-hmm.
What are some things that you're involved with that you would love to introduce people to?
Yeah. Well, locally, there's a couple things. I mean, at the Well, I am involved in the women's Bible study, the women's equipping. And so, if people are interested in Bible study with local teaching, I would love for more women to come to that. There's the Fig Garden location and then also the Clovis location. And I'm also the leader of a group called Lead Loved, which is a quarterly gathering of women leaders. And it can be women, however you see yourself as a leader, which is most women, right? I mean, if you're a mom, if you work in a nonprofit, if you are a leader in your church or your community, your neighborhood in any way, anyone is welcome. And kind of the idea of Lead Loved is that we gather together each quarter. Sometimes we'll have lunch or we'll do a workshop, but it's a place where women can connect with other leaders. We can pray together, we can rest together, and we can just really learn, kind of equipping each other. So for example, this past one that we met, we had to do it online, but it was kind of cool because a lot more people came because we were doing it on Zoom, and we did a workshop on trauma. So two of my friends led that workshop and just talking about how do you lead people through trauma? How do you lean into your own trauma and get healing and help for that so that you can lead others well? And it was a really neat opportunity. My friend Deshauna Ricks, Dr. Ricks, and Whitney Bunker, who leads the City Without Orphans organization, they led that workshop. So that's another way that if people want to get involved, we have a gathering coming up in October, and you can just go to our website or Instagram, and it's leadloved.com.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, and I'll put all that information in the description. So to wrap this up, your book that's coming out, it's available for pre-order. Where can they find it? And again, kind of give us a little idea of what it's about again.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, it's coming out September 29th. I'm birthing this baby into the world. And people can pre-order it right now on Amazon, or if there's another place that you like to buy your books, it's, Barnes & Noble, christianbook.com, all those will be carrying it. And the book really is reaching out to runners and walkers in Fresno. So, and I mean, not just Fresno, all over the world, but for this audience. So my husband, Sean, and I, we coach local runners, and we've done a lot of races. My husband is often the announcer at races. He has a background in running and triathlons. And we're excited about this book because I think it just really, it goes beyond seeing running just as exercise or as weight loss. And it has us really think about how running is this thing that we can do, that we can experience God's creation, we can experience God's presence, we can go on a prayer run, we can actually make it a part of our prayer experience. And it's a place where we can find this kind of therapy. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a big advocate for actual real therapy, but I know that I was able to go through a lot of my grief journey and feel this healing because I was running and I was meeting God as I ran. And everybody's wired a little bit differently. But I'm an Enneagram 7, so I'm an enthusiast, and I love to feel and understand things physically and emotionally. And so getting out and doing a run was something that was really powerful for me, just as a way to process my grief too. So it's not just a book about grief, it's really a book for anyone who enjoys that type of exercise or who is facing some kind of challenge in their life.
Awesome. Last question for you. I know your kids are probably getting hungry. But
Yeah.
so here in the local area, I know you probably won't want to tell us the most beautiful, the best trail out there, because I can imagine you want to keep that to yourself. But where is somewhere that you would recommend? What's a good place to walk or run, and get that glory of God all around them?
Oh man, there's so many, and I really don't mind sharing, honestly. But let's see, probably the closest one that I like to go to is the Winchell Cove Trail, and it's right at Millerton Lake. So
Okay.
I live in Northeast Fresno. It's only about 20 minutes from my house if I'm driving over there. And what I love about Winchell Cove is there really is beauty in different seasons. Now, I'll be honest, I don't love running there at this time of year when it's so hot outside and it's like straw grass.
Yeah.
But it is beautiful in the fall and the colors, and even in the winter, even in the rainy season, you just the rolling hills, it's not super hard.
Okay.
It's kind of more like rolling hills, and you can see the water. I've done that run even on Christmas Eve with a group of local friends, and just, seeing kind of the fog and the blue of the water on that day. So that's one I would recommend, but there's so many locally. Like, we just are absolutely rich with local trails and places that you can run and go.
Yeah, we got we like to do a little hiking, nothing crazy. But there's the app, I think it was All Trails or something like that. We
Yeah.
use that. So we made a mistake and took all 5 of my kids. It was a hot day, and we picked a trail that said easy, and it was not easy. And
Oh
I think,
no.
I think we lost the kids it's going to be a while before they want to come back, but oh well.
Yeah, my kids are kind of like that. They're like, "Oh, mom's taking us on another adventure. How many miles are we going to have to hike today?"
Yeah, but
I'm
we've
like, "There's
learned.
a waterfall. There's God's glory at the
Yeah.
end."
Yeah, no, we've learned. We take backpacks of water now. I mean, we're much better doing the whole trail stuff, but it's been fun. We love it. So thank you
Great.
for sharing that trail information. Dorina, I appreciate you. I'm glad you're in this area. I can imagine there's so many women, and there's so many there's widows and people that I'm looking forward. I can just envision meeting people and connecting with people that I want to connect with you. So I'm glad we connected. I'm glad we got to learn about the different ministries that you're a part of and your story. I just really appreciate you 100%.
Well, thank you, Nick. It's been fun to unpack some of those old stories too, and I love just tracing God's faithfulness.
Yes, awesome. Well, again, we got the book Walk, Run, Soar. I love it. And I'll put all the information in there. We can pre-order it and get the old books too, all of them. And we will see you later, Dorina. Thank you very much. And we'll see everybody else. Adios. Goodbye.
Thank you.